Hey everyone, this is Darren, and this screencast is going to go through the process of starting the webinar that you have already scheduled. So again, you'll just go to your desktop and find the Firefox icon and double click on it. That will, at that point, launch your Firefox web browser. And then you would go up to the tab section, locate the tab that says WebEx, and click on that. That'll then launch the WebEx interface. You will then log in with our login information, so it's DSTEVENS and the password. And if you don't have the password, you can call me or email me and I'll give it to you, or maybe Judy has it. Click on later because that'll come up for the time being. Then, if this were actually the day of your webinar, in this area here, your webinar would be listed, and over in this area over here, there would be a link that would say Start Webinar. But since I'm actually doing this as a demonstration, that webinar date is not showing up. So I'm going to go ahead and find that webinar date, and I believe the last one that I set up for the scheduling webinar was on the 21st of July. So I'll just go ahead and click on that webinar date. And using this method, you go over here and it says Start. So you just click Start and it starts the webinar. Then it goes through this process where it's launching the WebEx webinar interface. And I usually do this process about 10 minutes before the webinar is scheduled to begin, just to make sure that I'm online when everybody else starts getting online and I have everything set up and I'm ready to go. So this is what then opens up. This is the quick start page for the webinar, and then this right here is the audio conference, and you would use the headphones that I left up there last week when I was up at ClearFocus. And I can't do this now because I'm actually recording through the headset I would be using to do the webinar. But you would click right here where it says use computer headset, and then it would automatically make the call in and you would be online with all of the participants that were on the webinar. But I'm not going to do that today because, again, I'm using that to record this screencast. So then, again, this is about 10 minutes before the webinar starts. You go up to the top here, and on the menu bar here, you click on Share, and then Presentation or Documents. And then obviously my computer set up different than the one in the graphics room up at ClearFocus, but you, George and Brenda, both have webinar presentations in each of your own folders that are branded toward each of your contact information and so forth. But I'm going to go ahead and navigate my way to where I have the webinar on my computer here. Now, the webinar you want to use is the one that has the icon with the world in it. That's an icon. It's a UCF file, and it is a special file type that allows the participants to view rich media like the web browser and the PDF files and so forth that are part of the presentation. So just navigate your way to your folder and find the webinar presentation that you want to use, whether it's the short one, whether it's the Solvent or Aqueous one, or the full webinar, whichever one. Find the one with the icon, the world icon, and double click on it. It'll then load that presentation into the WebEx interface. So here you go, and this is where you're at prior to your meeting starting. So what will happen now is, as you get closer to the meeting, you'll see the participants' names pop up here. On this side, in this column here, this will indicate that they are able to view the webinar. This column here is an indication that they are able to hear the webinar, that they have been able to connect via audio. So you'll see as they come up their names and whether they're connected through both video and audio. And as they come up and as I see their names and I know that they're connected with both, I'll usually say hello and start chatting with them a little bit. Eventually there's usually too many people to chat with, but I kind of get things started and break the ice that way, chatting with the first few people who enter the webinar. If anybody has an issue with audio, usually everyone gets on with the video. It's not a problem, but audio tends to be, for whatever reason, the bigger issue. If you go up here in these tabs up here, if you click on the Info tab, I sometimes leave that open while I see people trying to still get into the webinar, because this shows all of the audio information necessary to dial in to the webinar. So I'll oftentimes display that tab so that as people are trying to log in prior to the start of the webinar, they'll see that information. So I'll go back to the actual presentation here. So once everyone is logged in and ready to go, I have this presentation up. It'll say ClearFocus Imaging welcomes whoever your client is. You'll have to change the PowerPoint presentation to indicate that and reflect that. The way you navigate your way through all the slides is up here, and you can see if I click down here, these are all the slides in the full webinar. And to advance from one slide to the next, you click on this arrow here. So if I were to click on this arrow as I'm starting the webinar, it takes me to the agenda page. And again, the agenda, I welcome everybody, I introduce myself and so forth. I then do a little housekeeping, and what that really means is describing what happens on this side of the webinar and how they can communicate through these fields over here. And I usually tell them that there are basically 3 ways of asking a question if they have one. One is to type a question in the chat field. Type a question and send. That question comes up, and then everyone can see it, or if they just want to just send it to, well, if they want to just send it to me, they can. But they can type in a chat question if they want to ask a question that way. They can. It doesn't show it in this webinar here because I'm actually the host, but there's a tab right here that says raise your hand, and they can click on that and raise their hand, and I let them know that if they want to raise their hand, I'll get to their question as quickly as I can. Or the third way is there'll be a section, a slide in the presentation where we'll stop and answer any questions anyone has. So I'll then go through the rest of the agenda, and I do that because I just like to let people know what to expect as we're moving through the webinar. There's a poll question I like to ask, but I'm not going to go into that now. And if you guys want to go into that and ask a poll of like familiarity with our products and so forth, I can show you how to do that, or we can generate other polls if you want to do that. But for now, I'm just going to I'll just bypass that. So then I basically just start the webinar. This is obviously the full webinar, but I just go through the whole thing and do my presentation. You guys can do whatever your presentation is as you go through it. And I won't go through the whole thing now, but then eventually I will get to this slide, which is their ability to navigate our website and to browse our website. And just so you know, what I tell everyone is you can all browse this through this webinar. You can browse our website independently of one another. What I like to point out is that obviously our website's full of information, but I like to ask them to hover over the products tab, and then I go through the various pages under that tab. After I do that, I like to ask them to hover over the customer tech support tab, and then I go through many of the various pages that are underneath that tab. I think for me, I think those are the most important areas of the website. I then sometimes touch on the gallery and let them know there are photos they can download for online presentation if they like. So that's about it. I then get to the final slide of the presentation, which is the contact information. Of course, for Brenda and George, it's your contact information that shows up on the slide, not mine, as I did brand a presentation for each of you. At this point, I say before I conclude the presentation, do I take any and all questions that they may have. At that point, we wrap it up. I answer the questions, we wrap it up, everyone kind of says goodbye. You go up here to the upper left and click on File and slide down to End Meeting and just click on End Meeting. It asks you if you're sure you want to end the meeting. Click Yes. At this point, you can actually share, or you could save any of the chat information that came up, shared documents, whatever. There are options for saving files from the meeting. At this point, I've just been clicking No. I'll probably get to something else eventually. But basically, that's it. That's how you start the webinar that you had previously scheduled.